Hello, my name is Diana Lindsay, and welcome to another Sunbelt Spotlight. We're so glad you could join us. Today, our special guest is Daniel Cartamil. He is the author of our book, Baja Wild Side. And I don't know if you've been able to see this or read it, but you're going to find out all about the book and what a wonderful photographer he is. And if you are interested in obtaining a copy of the book afterwards, please check our website because we will offer this as a discount for all of you that are watching this and are interested in his book. To tell you a little bit more about Daniel, he is an expert on shark biology, and he works at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, has been working in Baja California for many, many years, and has been really instrumental in with the conservation of sharks in Mexico. And in this process of doing this, he has spent a lot of time on the coast and has discovered Baja's wild side and is a wonderful photographer. And this book features the photography that he has taken over all of these years. It's a good combination. He's been able to see the impact that people have on the land, the impact that fishermen have on the sharks, and he's been able to combine his expertise into this wonderful book. It is really my pleasure to introduce Daniel Cartamil, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what he's going to share with us today. Daniel, welcome aboard.
Thank you, Diana. Well, let me say hello to everybody. Thanks for coming out and seeing this presentation. I appreciate it. I'm going to share the screen with you here, and hopefully you are now seeing my slideshow. So, yeah, as Diana said, I've been working in Baja for a long time. Since 2006 was my first trip to Baja California. And so I'm going to just give you a quick, brief overview of what kind of my Baja adventure has been like and how it led to this book, Baja's Wild Side. And you'll notice the title here actually has a little, before it says photography, it says sharks and that's because this whole journey into Baja California actually started with sharks and shark biology. And so I wanted to just maybe give you a little introduce the shark research that led me into Baja California. Does the sound come through okay there? Okay, good.
Great.
So let's get started then. So this journey starts with a shark called the thresher shark, and it actually starts around the year 2001 or 2002 when I became a grad student at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And I was studying this shark called the thresher shark. It's a big shark, gets up to about 20 feet in length. And I was studying their movements using a particular type of technology, which are called acoustic telemetry tags. So this is what you see here. This is a tag attached to the back of a thresher shark. And you can use these tags to follow the sharks around the ocean and track their movement patterns because the tags emit a sound pulse. And you can use that sound pulse to follow the shark around the ocean. So I'll give you show you a really quick video that's kind of fun. That just kind of illustrates how this process used to work. We'd go out and fish all day, and we'd catch these thresher sharks by hand with hook and line, and then we would tag them. And so what you're seeing here is kind of the tagging process. After a long process of trial and error, we realized that just the best way to tag these sharks was to hold them by the tail and let them squiggle and squirm for a few minutes. And so that's what you're seeing here. Somebody's up on the boat holding the shark by the tail, and underwater the shark's kind of squirming around, and that's good actually because it tires the shark out a little bit, and now the shark is a little bit more docile. We can tag it very easily and it's a lot less dangerous. So that's what's going on here. I've just tagged the shark just below the dorsal fin with one of these tags, and you can see the tag on the dorsal fin. So now we extract the hook from the shark's mouth, that's always kind of the dicey part of this whole operation, is getting your hand that close to the shark's mouth. And then once the hook is out, the shark swims away and basically goes on to live the rest of its life. But at this point, we're just getting started with our research. So now we can actually start following the shark around the ocean by using specialized gear on the boat to listen to that pulse that the shark's tag is putting out. So this is our research vessel that you're looking at. And typically we would follow the shark from anywhere from 24 to 72 hours on board this little boat. This is actually a luxury boat compared to the boat we usually have. This one had indoor sleeping quarters. Usually we'd have to just sleep on the deck in a little 15-foot dinghy. So that's kind of what the operation looks like. And essentially, I could go on and on for days just about the shark biology, but that's not really why we're here. But the point of all of this is that we were studying threshers in Southern California, and that's where Scripps Institution of Oceanography is located, near San Diego. And this region right here in Southern California turns out to be a real hot spot for thresher sharks. There's a lot of them there, especially in the spring and summer. But one of the things that our tags were showing us were that a lot of the sharks that we tagged were being captured by fishermen in Mexico, or we would follow the sharks to the border, but then we couldn't keep going because it's not really legal for us to cross over the border. So we knew that sharks were moving around a lot, and we had this question: are sharks migrating into Mexican waters? Specifically, are they migrating into the Mexican waters? Really important question, because if they are migrating down there, they could be getting caught in Mexican fisheries, commercial fisheries for sharks that exist. And that's really important for us to know so that we can actually manage the populations properly, so that we can manage catch limits and things like that. Sharks being caught in the Mexican portion of the fishery could actually be impacting the sustainability of the overall population. So what I wanted to do was go down into Mexico and Baja California and see how far down the coast these sharks were traveling and if they were being caught in the fishing camps down there. So as one of the projects of my PhD thesis at Scripps, I wanted to survey the artisanal fishing camps along the Pacific coast of Baja California. So you can see here, each of these little yellow dots on the map. This is the Baja California Peninsula, which is, on the northwestern Mexico, of course, right below California. And each of these little yellow dots represents a little fishing camp. So I'll show you some fishing camps in a minute, but the idea is that we wanted to visit each of these fishing camps for several years, documenting the catch and seeing how far down the coast thresher sharks were being caught and in what numbers and that kind of thing. So these artisanal fishing camps that we were visiting were very different than what we typically think of as fishing operations in the United States. They're not these big ports with sophisticated marinas and that kind of thing. These are little fishing camps in often very remote areas that are hard to get to, and the fishermen travel out there seasonally and they'll live in a little camp like this. This is a fishing camp called Punta Canoas, where, as you can see, the fishermen basically live there in little plywood shacks while they're fishing there for the season. They launch their boats from the beach, they fish for 1 or 2 days and come back to the beach. So everything takes place right here. So as I was saying, the idea for this project was to visit these fishing camps and kind of survey them systematically. So for several years, I was traveling up and down the coast, talking to fishermen, getting an idea of when they were fishing, what they were catching. Of course, we would actually camp out on the beach very often and document the catch of sharks and rays that was coming in from these different fishing operations. And as you can see here in the bottom left-hand corner, this is actually a thresher shark, and there's a bunch of them in this pile. One of the things that we found was that the range of thresher sharks goes exactly halfway down the peninsula and pretty much ends at what we call the Guerrero Negro region. So I could talk about I could spend 10 hours telling you about what we found with sharks. It's really fascinating. That's a whole other topic. But what's really interesting about this whole thing is that it led to several unexpected adventures and unexpected places, not only for me personally, but for my academic career. So and what I mean by that is that in the course of traveling from one of these fishing camps to the other, we had to go through a lot of very remote regions. Luckily, I was traveling and working with Mexican collaborators from the Mexican Oceanographic Institute, which is called CICESE and is located in Ensenada. And so I had some Mexican companions to help me out with this process. Otherwise, I never could have done it. Well, we would travel through these crazy, long, windy roads through the middle of nowhere, which was kind of scary and very adventurous and very fun. But one of the things that came out of this was that as we're traveling from camp to camp, we'd pass through regions of the Pacific coast that I just couldn't believe. We would see areas where we would travel for 20 to 30 miles at a stretch without seeing any sign of a human. And then, it maybe be a little fishing camp and we'd travel another 20, 30 miles without seeing a human. And these areas were some of the most pristine and beautiful coastal regions I'd ever seen. And I've been around a little bit as a marine biologist. So as we're traveling up and down the coast, we're working at these artisanal fishing camps. We're seeing all these amazing places. And wherever we happen to be for the night, we would just set up our tents and camp out. And so we got to see a lot of the coast, a lot of the regions that typically most people will never see because they're very difficult to get to. And, I'm a marine biologist. My main job there was to be a marine biologist, but I'm also a photographer, and I've been an amateur photographer ever since my Uncle Peter gave me my first camera as a little kid. And so wherever we would stop for the night, we would set up camp, and I would run out and try and do as much photography as possible before the sunset. And so I started to compile this very large library of photography from some of the most remote areas of the Pacific coast. And after several years, I actually got some funding to expand this, and we were able to travel to some of the more inland areas of Baja California as well, specifically to document photographically some of the more remote regions of the western side of Baja California. So this project with the photography eventually encompassed not only the coast, but also the deserts and mountain ranges inland from the coast, mostly on the Pacific side of the state of Baja California. And after several years of doing this, what my ultimate goal was to publish a book of photography, a conservation photography book, if you will, which would highlight or rather be a photographic journey through Baja California's Pacific Coast region. And the reason I wanted to publish this book was twofold. First of all, I realized through my travels that it is an imperiled region. I know I've been stressing the remoteness of it, but there's the flip side, which is that a lot of Baja California is being populated very quickly. This can be highlighted by simply looking at the census numbers from the last century. If you look at the census numbers around 1920, they state that there was about 20,000 people in the entire Baja California Peninsula, whereas a century later, there's over 4 million, and that number is rapidly growing. A lot of that growth taking place, of course, in the near border regions where Mexico borders the United States, but also in some of the more remote and more pristine regions. So it's an imperiled landscape, and I just wanted to increase public awareness about the beauty and fragility of some of these landscapes. So when I published this book, and as I was writing it, I divided the Baja California landscape into 4 general regions here, which I'll just show you very quickly on the screen so that you can kind of just get an idea, a very quick taste as to what the Pacific Coast region of Baja California looks like for those of you who are not too familiar with it. So first of all, I started out close to home, just across the border in what we call the Gold Coast region. This is from the San Diego, Mexico border down to about San Quintin or so. It's a beautiful area, very rugged, a lot of coastal humidity and fog, so it's a very distinctive place. One of the things that's amazing about this area is that despite the fact that it's probably the most populated part of the entire Baja Peninsula, there are also some very large tracts of relatively undisturbed native habitat that you rarely see in Southern California, like this coastal chaparral. And what's fascinating about Baja California, and this is one of the themes of the book, is that there's just an enormous diversity of not just geology and landscapes, but also life. And so here we can be on the Pacific coast. This happens to be near Punta Colonet, which you see back in the background there. But if we were to travel inland from the Pacific coast only 40 miles, so basically an hour and a half driving up into the mountains inland from the Pacific coast, you would end up at an elevation of over 10,000 feet in the, and here's the highest point in Baja California, Picacho del Diablo. So it's just amazing how you can go from the coast at sea level, make it all the way up to 10,000 feet, and go through successively maybe 10, 20 different types of ecosystems as you travel over 40 miles. So here we are at the top of the mountain range. It's a dense pine forest. It's completely snow covered in the winter. Not most people's idea of Baja California, but there it is. Okay, so let's just talk, let's follow this pattern of geographic diversity a little bit more. And we'll head a little south from the Gold Coast and the High Sierra. And as you can see here, we're entering what's called the Valley of the Bujums. In Spanish, it's called Valle de los Cirios. And this is an area that is named after this very charismatic tree, the Cirio or Bujum tree, which kind of looks like a tree that would come out of a Dr. Seuss book. And so that is kind of the most charismatic and emblematic plant of the region. But as you travel around, what's beautiful about the Valley of the Bujums is that not only are there lots of Bujums, but there's also these enormous cardone cacti, some of the largest in the world. They reach heights of over 60 feet, and they inhabit a beautiful lunar landscape that you really have to be in to believe and appreciate. But so I was blown away by the natural beauty of Baja California as I adventured and did photography. But what really hooked me, and what hooks a lot of people into Baja California, is the history from a human perspective, the anthropological perspective. So as you journey through the desert, you will find lots of remnants of ancient history, some of them more recent. For example, you might see the remains of Spanish missions. The Spanish were inhabiting Baja California as early as the 1500s, and through the 1700s, they built a series of adobe missions. So you can go into some very remote areas and explore those. That's incredible to see in and of itself. But the missions were built really to convert the natives, and those natives, several different native groups had been there for thousands of years. And you can actually, when you travel through the peninsula, you see their remnants as well. And that's even more fascinating. They often consist of rock art. So rock art is ubiquitous throughout the entire peninsula, but I'm talking about Baja California. For those of you, I should have mentioned this before, if you're not really aware, Baja is the peninsula. Baja California is the northern part of the peninsula. Baja California Sur is the southern part of the peninsula. So I'm talking about Baja California, the northern half of the peninsula. and it's filled with this kind of rock art reminiscent of Native Americans that have lived there for thousands of years. And in the northern part of Baja California, the rock art consists primarily of petroglyphs, which are carvings into the rock, and very often they're these really abstract geometric shapes that are quite fascinating. So from the Valley of the Bujams, we can travel westwards to the coast. This is simply the coast of the Valley of the Bujams, but I gave it its own chapter in the book because we spent a lot of time here. I called it the Wild Coast simply because it's a region of Baja California that is characterized by a lack of human activity. There's maybe a fishing camp every 10, 20 miles or so, but it's very hard to get into this region. There's no paved roads. So it's a great place to go if you really just want to get lost and experience nature the way it's always been. So another one of my favorite regions of Baja California is this Lost Coast region. And then going further southeast, again, we continue this trend of changing diversity or diversity of geography. So we'll travel a little bit further south and we enter Bahia Sebastián Vizcaíno. That is the Vizcaíno Bay, if you want to call it that in English. That's this area to the southwest of Baja California. It's the largest bay in Baja, very productive. Huge shark fisheries there, which is why I went originally. But it's also very different from a geographic perspective. It's composed of a lot of wetlands and dominated by yucca trees that look very much like Joshua trees if you've been to Joshua Tree National Park in Southern California. So it's a really fascinating place as well. If you look at the map in the bottom right corner where my cursor is, I hope you can see that cursor moving around. There's a huge lagoon down there, which is called Ojo de Liebre, which I worked in a lot. And one of the big draws of Ojo Liebre from an ecotourism standpoint is the fact that a lot of people go there to see whales that migrate in, gray whales specifically, that migrate into the lagoon to give birth and spend several months in the spring. And so that's an amazing experience to go there and get to see these whales and interact with them up close. And again, the rock art that I referenced earlier is ubiquitous throughout the peninsula. So as you move inland from Bahia Sebastián Vizcaíno, you enter the Vizcaíno Desert region, which has its own brand of rock art, which is called the Great Mural style of rock art. So this is kind of a rock art style which is characterized by very large human paintings of large humans, often 20 feet high, as well as other animals of the region like mountain lions and deer. And so that's what you can see here. And it's fascinating to think that researchers have dated these paintings to anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 years of age. So it's just an amazing place. The feeling you get when you climb up to a cave like this and you look out over an expanse and don't see a single human or a house and just hear the crystalline silence of Baja California, that's why we go down there. And you have to live through it to really understand it. So the book covers all of these aspects of Baja California. That's that region specifically along the Pacific coast. It also covers, of course, to a lesser extent, some of the humans who are also part of the landscape, specifically some of the fishermen that I worked with for many years and some of their families. And I just want to say, as we just touch on that subject, that the people, specifically the rural people and the fishermen of Baja California were probably, couldn't be more generous and helpful and humble and humorous. Some of the most beautiful people I've ever met were down there in the fishing camps of Baja California and in the ranchos in the mountains and in the deserts. So all of this took place over a course of many years. I started working in Baja in 2006 and was collecting photography through 2016. and with the idea of publishing this book. And thanks to Sunbelt, we finally got the book published in May of 2017. So there's, you can kind of see what the book looks like. That's the book jacket. It's got about 120 images in it, and it's really good, if I can say that. But what happened concurrently with the book release is that the San Diego Museum of Natural History took an interest in this photography, and they actually put up a gallery of the book's images, which covered the entire fourth floor of the museum for almost 2 years. So of all the things that have happened, I would say this gallery of photography at the Nat was probably the highlight of my professional career. It was just a thrilling thing to see these images blown up to 8 feet wide and see all the little details. That's really the best way to see these things. Afterwards, after the book was published and after this gallery, I actually got a little bit depressed because I was like, well, it's all downhill from here. What could possibly happen? But luckily, I was able to secure funding for a part 2 of this book, which will be coming out hopefully through Sunbelt, maybe in a year and a half. So stay tuned. I'll just give you the real quick rundown of what it is. But essentially, part 2 of the book covers everything that I wish I could have gone and seen when I was doing the photography for the first book. The first book was essentially photography I did while working at another job, but I was able to secure funding from a private foundation that allowed me to just travel the entire state of Baja California for 2 years, and go to the most wild and remote places, typically with local guides. And this next book will also cover the coast of the Sea of Cortez, which is a whole other world. So it's going to be an amazing book. When I don't have really a lot of pictures from it because I'm still going through them, but the coast of the Sea of Cortez is very different than the Pacific coast. It's much drier, much different geographically. It's going to be a wild journey through Baja California when you get to see this new book. And of course, we went to all sorts of very remote areas to find new rock art sites like this one. This one I like because it kind of looks like there's a spaceship landing out here in the middle of the desert, and the Bujums are communing with the spaceship, which for all I know is what actually happened. And of course, we had lots of wildlife encounters along these journeys, not just snakes, but bighorn sheep, bobcats, things like that. So there's a little bit more nature in this upcoming book as well. And just finishing up, I just wanted to mention that a book of this, a project of this magnitude is not the kind of thing you do alone. I've been collaborating with a lot of people, but mostly with a guy named Omar Santana, who is the director of the conservation group Encinitas in Ensenada. So Omar has been really a big player in this. I couldn't have done it without him. And also for those of you who travel through Baja California and might want to be looking for a guide, I've been working with a guide named Nathan Velasco from the town of Catavina. If you need a guide who is crazier than you are and will take you to the places you never would have even thought of going, Nathan Velasco is the guy to take you there. So basically that's it. That's my short presentation. I want to thank you for tuning in and checking it out. Thank the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and Sunbelt Publishing for supporting these photography conservation projects. And if you want to get in on the newsletter so you get information about new adventures and the upcoming project, you can check out bajaswildside.com. So thank you.
Any folks have questions they would like to ask Daniel? I'm sure he would love to answer them if you have some questions.
I have one. This is Carol. Are you concerned perhaps that if you have this book out that people might want to start going down there, and it could cause an increase in tourism? Or is it remote enough that you don't think that is something to worry about?
No, that's a great question, and of course that's something that you struggle with. Yeah, there's always a line, and I take a lot of images of some very remote places and some relatively sensitive places. So I'm very careful not to give out locations and that kind of thing. But to answer your question from a broader perspective, the answer is the cat's already out of the bag. I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. It's out there. So most of the places that I went to are really hard to get to. And you know how I found it? I scoured the internet through forums and stuff, and people already have, you know, all sorts of information out there. A lot of the rock art sites, for example, have locals give tours to them and that kinds of thing. So
sort of like the gypsum caves in Anza-Borrego, they tried to keep it quiet for so many years and then finally had to give it up.
yeah, I mean, with the internet in the last decade or so, it's impossible to keep places secret anymore. And it's not just the internet, it's the advent of all this new technology. People have these razors and off-road vehicles that can go anywhere. So it's not like 20 years ago where you would have to almost kill yourself to get to a spot. These vehicles can, and I'm sure in 10 years there'll be drones that can just drop you right on top of the spot.
Okay.
So
I have one more thing.
yeah, let me just answer, let me just
sure.
address one last thing, because it's an important point that you bring up. So what I think is probably one of the best solutions to this is what's happening already in a lot of areas down there, particularly in rock art sites, where locals kind of are put in charge, and they benefit financially from being able to take people there, but they're also certified by INA, which is the Archaeological Society, to be able to take people there responsibly and even possibly camp in spots without impacting the sites negatively.
Yeah,
And then the first picture that you just showed on the for the second book, it actually looked like a whale with an eye and a mouth, not a spaceship to me. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I wanted to add one more thing in there to Daniel's comment. It's been our philosophy at Sunbelt Publications that if you can educate people about areas and so that they understand the sensitivity and understand why it needs to be protected, and they learn to love the area, then they're going to be a voice out there that is going to help protect the area. So we feel that by having publications, by having education about these areas, that we're actually doing our part to protect it rather than opening it up for, you know, for misuse, because like Daniel had said, it's already online. So what we can do to try to correct the situation of just people going in there and destroying the area or abusing it is to educate them about the sensitivity of the area and how special it is and encourage them to protect those areas.
Well said.
Anyone else with a question for Daniel? Daniel, what got you into sharks?
Oh, well, it's just one of those things, actually. Thank you, Meredith. It was one of those things that happens when just by happenstance. I had graduated from college with a biology degree. I had no idea what to do, and my Uncle Peter, who I believe is on this call, actually suggested that I contact this biological field station in the Bahamas and I had no idea even what they did. For all I knew, they studied lobster, but I volunteered to go work down there, and it turned out it was a shark research facility. And so I stayed there for 3 years, and I got hooked into, you know, no pun intended, I got hooked on studying sharks, and I've been doing so ever since. I've been studying sharks in the Bahamas, San Diego, the East Coast, Hawaii, and Alaska.
But do you find that your research on sharks is encouraging more people to learn more about it? Because you're teaching classes at Scripps, and so I assume a lot of that is some of it general marine life, but probably focus on sharks too. So you're encouraging greater studies on this area, learning more about it?
Yeah, sure. It's and what I do as a teacher is I just introduce a lot of these subjects through shark biology. So if we're studying ecology, I'll just bring up a topic in shark ecology, and you know, people always learn better when they're interested. So it's a little more interesting to study a subject when there's sharks involved. So it's actually a great vehicle for those kinds of things. Did you want to look at the chat? I saw that there was a question about safety in Baja California, and there's a bunch of that, and I get those kind of questions a lot. Like this one from Vic says, "What about banditos or drug cartels? Is it safe? We have a camper." And I just want to say one thing about that, because the answer is yes and no. So if anyone's thinking about going down there, sadly with COVID, I have been hearing a lot of reports that it's a little bit less safe than it was. But I think when you're in the middle of nowhere, it's pretty safe from a human perspective in terms of, you know, the people that you encounter for the most part are just, like I said, not only decent people, they're some of the best people I've ever met. But that being said, you have to be really careful and ask locals and ask around and know where the safe places are and where they aren't. So one of the first things that we would do when we got to any location was we would talk to the ranchers in the area, and very often we'd ask them, where can we go? Where shouldn't we go? And very often there was a very definitive answer. You can go anywhere along the coast, just don't take this road down to Puerto whatever, because that's a road that the narcos happen to be using right now and you don't want to be there. And so that kind of thing does happen. It's definitely part of the landscape. But like I said, if you're properly informed, you can probably do things quite safely. But that's part of the danger, and it's also part of the charm of Baja, is that no matter how safe you're doing it, it is a little dangerous. It's part of the adventure.
Right. Well said. Well, if we don't have any more,
questions? There's a few questions in the chat, it looks like.
Okay.
When you said the shark migration stopped at a certain spot, do you mean the fishing stops them, or that the sharks stop moving further south?
Oh, well, that's a really interesting thing is that when we look at the Pacific coast of the Baja California Peninsula, basically from the U.S. border all the way down to Cabo San Lucas, it's about 1,000-mile stretch, and it's broken up right in the middle by a peninsula that juts out that's called the Vizcaíno Peninsula. And the really remarkable thing about the oceanography of the Pacific coast of Baja is that north of that peninsula, so in other words, basically the northern half of the peninsula has freezing cold water, because cold water currents are coming down from the north, but then they get deflected offshore by this peninsula. If you're south of that, like basically the entire southern half of the Pacific coast, you're in warm water. So what we found is that there's a very sharp demarcation between cold water species that live in the northern half of the peninsula and warmer, more tropical species that live in the southern half of the peninsula. So that's why I say the sharks that we were studying, they only migrated about halfway down the peninsula, because that's where conditions change. So there's essentially a line where most organisms don't cross, and that happens to be the Vizcaíno Peninsula. So if you're on one side of the peninsula, you see a whole different slew of marine life than on the other side of the peninsula. It's pretty fascinating from an oceanographic perspective.
Great. Well, thank you Daniel. We appreciate you being part of our Sunbelt Spotlight today. It's been a real pleasure to have you, and we're looking forward to getting your manuscript for the next book.
All right. And thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it. Love seeing all of you out there.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye, everybody.